Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts of the Apostles and Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. Now before we begin studying Revelation 18, let me give out some Bible verses so y'all can help me with the class. Who will read a Bible verse for me tonight? Jim. Isaiah 47, verses 12 and 13. That's going to be a central theme of everything we're talking about tonight. Who else will read a verse for me? Lori. Genesis 11 and 4. Who else? Vera. 2 Peter 3 and 10. Who else? Miss Francis, will you help? Colossians 1. Okay, that should be 16 through 17. I did that wrong. Colossians 1, 16 and 17. Who else?
I'll read one for you.
Good. Okay, good. Let's see. 1 Timothy 6, 7 through 10. 1 Timothy, the one that says 1 Timothy.
1 Timothy
6, 7 through 10. Yes, sir. Anybody else? I need two more. Clayton, Revelation 17 and 4. One more. John, Matthew 18 and 6. Okay, with all that having been done, you might want to take your paper, mark your page, and let's all flip together to Revelation chapter 18. Studying Revelation, you come down a trail of a lot of sorrow, a lot of mystery, things that are going on. Mainly, we've been talking the last few classes about Mystery Babylon. Now, Mystery Babylon is Satan's master plan for the conquest of the earth, and ultimately for the conquest of the universe, or so he thinks. Now, it began in the Garden of Eden. We talked about it before. In the Garden of Eden, Satan first came forth with a new world order. Okay, God set up the world in a certain order, and Satan wanted to change it. And through phases, by studying the Bible, you can see when he's tried time and again to do this. It got so bad before the flood that the world had to be destroyed at that time. Then again, he tries right after the flood with the Tower of Babel. And time again, finally. In Revelation, you see his final, complete master plan. All of the details are given in here. Okay? Last week we studied it. We studied bits and pieces of it way back when we started back on Revelation chapter 4, when we first started talking about this 7-year period, which is called what? The Great Tribulation. Okay, good. And now in this chapter, judgment is coming. Okay, or as an old Baptist preacher used to say, payday someday. That's what this chapter is about. See, from here on out, I'm going to be a lot more purple. Because now, beginning tonight, we're going to begin to see the good guys really winning in this story, okay? In this old world, the good guys take a beating, don't they, Sister Francis? We do. We try to do what's right, and when we try to do what's right, that's when we get treated wrong the most. And that's Scripture, isn't it? When you try to do God's will, the world is against you. And that's what we've seen all through this. Now, with all that in mind, let's look at what I call the final round in the battle for the championship of the universe, okay? Revelation 18, beginning at verse 1. And after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hole of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacy. Now notice that the angel that comes and speaks, we've seen angels all through here, different mighty angels, but this is a very mighty angel. And he cries out, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. Says it twice. That's for emphasis. When Jesus said something, it was always important. But when he said it and it was more important, he would say, verily I say. You remember seeing that? All through the Gospels, verily I say. But when he had something that was real important, he would repeat it. Verily, verily I say unto you. You only see that one or two times in the Scriptures because that's so important. We see that same emphasis here with Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. Through history, we've seen Babel raised up right after the flood, and it seemed to fall. And then again, the nation Babylon would raise itself up in the Old Testament days, conquer Israel, and then it seemed to fall. Is Babylon still around today? Yeah. In a lot of different ways, it's all over the world. Specifically, just a couple of years ago, we watched a major battle being fought right in Babylon. Right in the cities that is talking about in these chapters, okay? But today we call it what? Instead of Babylon, what's that nation called today? The ruler is Saddam Hussein. No, Iraq. Iraq is the same place where Babylon was. In fact, one of the things he's been doing for many years is rebuilding the city of Babylon. They have festivals there now in the same city we're talking about right here. Okay? And so it is being rebuilt. And the centerpiece of his new city of Babylon will be the Tower of Babel. I have seen a model of it. They're going to rebuild it. Talk about history repeating itself and the Bible coming to life. Now that's very, very scary to think about. But it also says when those things happen, lift up your head. For our redemption's doing what? Drawing nigh. Right, Ricky. It's drawing nigh. Okay. So we're seeing another angel come down and it says, all right, it's all over. This is the end of that 7-year period. All the nations and the merchants are very upset. Okay? And Babylon, the doctrine, the spiritual side of this goes back a lot further than even the Tower of Babel. If you look on the back of your sheet tonight, you'll see we've discussed this time and again all through our study, but I've listed it for you tonight. There's 7 basic doctrines to Mystery Babylon. They go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Okay? The first 3 we see in Genesis chapter 3. Okay? Satan came first and he said, yea, hath God said. In other words, he tried to sow a seed of unbelief in God. That's the first key. The first thing Satan will do is destroy your belief in God and then get you into something else. The second thing, God had said they would surely die, and he said, you shall not surely die. Now that doctrine is taught in all the different religions of the world today. It's called reincarnation. You don't surely die. You die, but then you're going to come back again. And you're going to get another shot at it. See, that's pagan philosophy. Okay, that's reincarnation. And the third thing he said in the garden, he said, when you eat this fruit, you'll become as what? As gods. Yes. So the third platform, if you will, of the Mystery Babylon doctrine is personal godhood. Okay, the New Age movement is rife with that today. All other religions are full of that today. You saw a movie not too many years ago called Out on a Limb with Shirley MacLaine, where she stands on a beach with her arms stuck out with this. And you know what she's saying over and over again? Does anybody remember that scene from the movie? What's she saying? She stands there saying, I am God. I am God. After all her studies and stuff, she come to that conclusion. And it sounds silly to us, but if without the light of Christ, it's a very real trap many people are falling into. So Godhood is the third doctrine. In Genesis chapter 4, we see the fourth doctrine of Mystery Babylon. Now that's the story of Cain and Abel. Now Abel was a shepherd. What did he bring to sacrifice, Charlie?
Oh.
Abel. What did Abel bring?
He brought a lamb.
He brought a lamb. What's the lamb represent? What's the lamb represent? When John the Baptist saw Jesus coming out of the wilderness, what did he say?
Type of Christ.
Yeah, behold the Lamb of God. It all points to Jesus, doesn't it? What did Cain bring to the sacrifice?
For the land, which was his own work.
Okay,
Work
good,
of his own
yes.
hand.
What was the occupation of Cain? Can anybody remember? He was a farmer, and he brought the fruit of the ground. He brought his work. See what he had worked to grow. Okay? And we always wonder, why did he turn it away? Well, because Jesus said, you know, the scriptures say that for anything to remit sins, it's got to bleed, and plants don't bleed. And all of the Old Testament sacrifices were pointing to Jesus, the Lamb of God. And Cain, in his rebellion, refused to do it that way. He said, my works are good enough. So the fourth doctrine of Mystery Babylon is works salvation. All the other religions in the world, in one form or another, have a work system, a system where you do this and this and this and this, and you'll make it.
About 90% of that. In today's religious activity, that's what it is, about 90% of it.
Yeah, and it's like a stick and a carrot. Okay, you've heard the stick and the carrot, where they hold the stick and the carrot out in front of the donkey and he never quite reaches it. That's what work salvation is. Whatever it is you're doing, you're never quite doing enough. You've always got one more little thing out there you need to do a little more of, and it's always not to advance the gospel or to advance the message of Jesus, but to advance their organization. Whether you're selling books, as with the Jehovah's Witnesses, or going around like in India on your knees on the cobblestones, it's all doing something to lift up that group instead of lifting up Jesus. So work salvation. Yes, sir.
Religious politics.
Religious politics. Good. Yes. Okay. Now the fifth one we see in Genesis 31. This is a story where Jacob leaves Laban and comes back home. Remember when Jacob came back home? And he would have been okay, except somebody stole something. Who remembers who stole something? When Jacob left Laban and came home, Laban come after him, but not because of the daughters. That's what he said he was doing, but he was coming back because something had been stolen. Who can remember what had been stolen? Now that's the story of Joseph. That's a different one. That's a few chapters later, but that's close. Huh? The idols, the images had been stolen from their home. Rachel, while kind of wanting to believe in Jacob's God, didn't want to take any chances. So she said, well, I'll take the family gods with me, and I'll take them over here, and they'll be okay. See, they felt those gods back then had limited ability. But she's right. They said, in the Genesis story, it says stole the images of her father. That was the idols they prayed to. And so this is the fifth part of any false religious system. They pray to idols. Now, do we see a lot of that in the world today?
We have the idea today, well, God's all right, but we need something extra.
That's right. In fact, the second commandment is very specific about that, isn't it, of the 10 Commandments. Do not bow yourself down to idols. They do it in Asia, they do it in Africa, but they do it in Europe, they do it in America too. And some of them call themselves Christians and do it. They still are bowing down to idols, and that's wrong. Okay, now that's the first 5 doctrines. That's all of them that you really see explained in the book of Genesis. The last 2 doctrines, which really have a lot with the judgment that we're going to be talking about tonight, shows up in the book of Isaiah, chapter 47, verses 12 and 13. Who has that?
Stand now with thine enchantments, and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth.
Okay, stop just a second, Jim. We're talking to Babylon. God is talking through Isaiah to the nation of Babylon, and said when you first started out, you had enchantments and sorcery. So that was one of the first things they did at the Tower of Babel. Go ahead.
If so be thou shalt be able to profit, if so be thou mayest prevail. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counselors. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up, and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee.
Okay, the second thing that's in that verse is astrology. Sorcery and astrology. Sorcery is anything that you do to try to manipulate this world for you. That's sorcery or witchcraft, we call it. Okay? And astrology is manipulating the stars for your future, to manipulate your own future or another person's future. Those two things started where? He told us. Babylon and its youth, the Tower of Babel, those two things started. Do we see a lot of sorcery today? Do we see a lot of witchcraft today? As much as, say, 20 years ago. We see a lot more, don't we, than we ever did?
A lot more.
And what about what? Very good, yes, In fact, there's a lot of them in Lebanon we don't know about. I think there's a lot around here. I've talked to the sheriff. He says here in Wilson County and in Davidson County more than here, and also down in Murfreesboro, there's a lot of that type of activity. Okay? And so it's not anymore out in California or way over in England. England, which is the nation that has more witches than anywhere else. London has more witches than any other city in the world. Guess what is the second city biggest for witches in the world? We're watching it on the news every day now. There's a certain murder trial going on in that city where a man has killed his wife. What city is that? Los Angeles is the second city for witches in the world. Did you know that? That's right here in the good old USA. And there's more witches in that city than any other city except London, England. That's kind of scary. But that's where our world has come to today. That's sorcery. Astrology. Do we see a lot of astrology today?
You pick up the little old newspaper we have out there. It's in there all the time.
Okay, good, yeah. And even on the TV, don't you? There's these 900 numbers. Call this here psychic. Call this here astrologer. Learn about your future. Da-da-da-da-da-da. See, it's all basically the same thing. It comes under sorcery and astrology. Those 7 things together are the basic doctrines of Mystery Babylon. Okay? And in all false religions, you'll see some or all of these things. And that's how you tell them. You tell them by their what? By their fruits. You look for these things. You see these fruits in a thing, and you're looking to some extent to Mystery Babylon. Verse 4. I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people." I want you to notice that for a minute. Come out of her, my people. Now, if he's saying that, guess where some of his people is? If I need you to come out of the house, where are you at? You're in the house. If I need you to come out of Mystery Babylon, where are you at? Okay? Now, that's kind of scary too, isn't it? Okay, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. Remember the last 2 or 3 lessons we've read over and over again about all those plagues that fell upon those people, just like on the Egyptians in the old days. And it was because, a lot of them, because they had that mark. Remember, they got that mark on their hand in the middle of the tribulation, and all those plagues come on them because of it. Okay, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double, according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. Boy, God's getting kind of rough here. He's getting kind of rough here. What is it about? Notice that it says her sins reach into heaven. That reminded me of something else that Babylon tried to do back in the early days. Genesis 11 and 4 is the story. That's the story of the Tower of Babel. Somebody read for me Genesis 11 and 4.
And they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach to heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad from the face of the whole earth."
From the beginning, when they first started, they tried to build something that would reach into heaven. They finally get it done, but it ain't what they thought it was. They don't build a tower, but their sins have finally reached into heaven. And God has said enough. This is the end of it. Okay? Verse 7. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit as a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine. She shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. Now we're talking about one of the biggest cities on the face of the earth. Could be the old city Babylon. We've also seen where in the last chapter it pretty well pointed to the fact it could be the city of Rome that is the center of this activity at that time. But notice it says she's going to burn up in one day. In fact, later, as we read these verses, we're going to see she burns up in 1 hour. That's a pretty good fire, John. If it burns up a city in 1 hour. That's the most unusual fire, isn't it? I mean, we read about the Great Chicago Fire and the San Francisco Fire. Those fires burned for days and days, Francis. It didn't burn up those cities in a day, much less an hour.
That's akin to the atomic bomb.
Okay, good. Let's get on to it. 2 Peter 3 and 10. Who has that?
But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heaven shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up.
Now, the point we're at right here is 1,000 years before that event. Okay, that's at the end of the 1,000 years when the earth's finally destroyed. But it's the same principle we're talking about here, Charlie. The elements will melt with fervent heat. Okay? Now, I want to let you know that at the time Peter wrote those words, centuries ago, scholars laughed at him. The Greek philosophers and scientists dominated the world, just as we see science dominating the world today. They were the ones that came up with the term atom. A-T-O-M, the atom. And they figured out, they were smart enough to figure out, Ricky, your body is not just one solid chunk, but it's made up of billions and billions and billions of little atoms that are linked together into molecules and so on and so on. Okay? But they said that the atom is the basic building block of the universe, and there's no way you can break up that atom. It's the smallest thing. You can't bust it. So at the time Peter wrote this, when those letters got out, all the scientists of that, they said, ha, 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 look at these silly old hillbillies here, writing a book thinking that they could split the atom. Well, everybody knows that's impossible. 1,000 years later, in the midst of the Dark Ages, when they read this book, some people had intellectual problems. Because if they knew what the atom was and they knew what elements were, they said, oh, there's no way you can melt elements. It's the basic building blocks of the universe. That won't work. 100 years ago, scientists were still laughing at this book because it said elements could melt. 50 years ago, they stopped laughing. Do you know why? Something happened in World War II in a city called Hiroshima. It was a top secret until they dropped one bomb one day and destroyed Hiroshima. What kind of bomb was that? It was an atom bomb. See, that same atom, way back with the Greek philosophers, that same word was used. You know why? Because it will actually split the smallest part of matter, which is an atom, and make a big explosion like we've never seen before. And now we got helium bombs and hydrogen bombs and all kind of bombs that can blow up bigger and bigger and bigger. We've got bombs now that are 1,500 times as powerful as the bomb of Hiroshima. And that bomb destroyed a city in an hour. Burned that city up in an hour.
And that type of bomb before we have was much more powerful than that.
Yes,
That was just a little thing compared to what we got now. And that generated millions of degrees of heat for a few instances. And that's the reason it burns everything up.
Yes, sir. Everything is burned down in a little time. We've all seen pictures and movies, right, about what it's like to see a bomb blast. We would never really, hopefully they'll never set them off, but there's thousands of them around the world now. They could be set off at any time. But see, that's the basis of what Peter was saying. And that, I think, is really what makes Babylon burn in an hour. Okay? Is it a bomb? I don't know. God could just speak it and it could happen. But we do now have devices out there that could do it. Where, remember in the last chapter where we talked about Mystery Babylon being a woman and there was 10 kings and the beast and the woman? Does anybody remember how those 10 kings felt about the woman? They hated the woman. They worked with her, but they hated her. And that's that religious system we're talking about. And it says that God did that because he wanted it for his own good. He wanted it for his own ends. He had everybody hating each other. He allowed them to do that. So it very well could be, Clayton, those 10 kings decide it's enough. And they could very well shoot the missiles and do it. Or God, like I say, God could just say it and it could be done. The main thing is, now today, man has finally got smart enough to understand what Peter said 2,000 years ago.
When the destruction of the universe happens, God will be behind that and it's all going to burn up. And if
Yes,
the book is right, it's going to.
Yes, sir, that's exactly right. Okay, verse 9. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, Babylon, the mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Now notice something else unusual about this fire. There's nobody in there fighting that fire. The kings of the earth, the most powerful people on the planet, are staying away from that city. They're not going in to try to rescue anybody. Once again, why? It doesn't make sense till 50 years ago. What happens to people that go into a city where a bomb's just gone off, if it's a nuclear bomb? They die of radiation poisoning. See, it's the only thing that fits that we know of right now. See, so for some reason they're not going in there. And it says, it mentions it's after they see the smoke of her burning. Anybody ever seen the smoke that comes with a nuclear bomb? It's very distinctive shape. It's a mushroom, what we call a mushroom cloud. I think that's what they see. They see that and they say, well, we can't go in there. We can't go in there. We know what kind of things happen in there. And Colossians 1, 16 and 17 says something very important too about the nature of matter in the universe.
For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones, or dominions, or principalities, or powers. All things were created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist.
Okay, I want to notice the first phrase and the last phrase of what she read. By him, which is Jesus Christ, it's mentioned in that chapter, everything was created. And it says, by him, everything holds together. Now, let's talk a little nuclear physics. I ain't going to get way over your head, but I want to talk to you a little bit about why that phrase, by him, all things hold together, is important. Everything consists by him. Okay? Atoms are an electron, which whizzes around. You've seen pictures, that whizzes around out there. And in there, there's always at least two little jobbies right in the middle. One's called a neutron, one called a proton. Okay? And basically, the atom splits, there's that nuclear explosion. The thing is, no scientist has figured out yet. See, all that stuff by nature should fly apart. There's no scientific reason anybody has ever found why atoms stick together. Okay? But you just told us why they stick together. He created it, and he said stick together. And they stick together. For instance, that little fellow over there, Mr. Scott, stand up, Mr. Scott. He's about the smallest person in this room, I think. There's enough energy inside him that if it were released, okay, the whole state of Tennessee would be obliterated. Not just this building, not just this town, but there's enough nuclear power within that young man's body that if something just suddenly released it, it would leave a sizable crater all over this place. What holds him together? What holds them together? See, scientists are still puzzling over it. As smart as they are, nobody knows why these atoms that should fly apart hold together. You've just told us why. See, Jesus, how did it start way back in Genesis 1? And God did what? What did he do first when it all started? He said, let there be light. He spoke it. See, he just said, do it. And because he's God, all this matter just did it. It came together just as he said he wanted it to. Verse 11, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, all fine and wood and all manner of vessels of ivory, all manner of vessels of precious wood and of brass, iron and marble, cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. Notice all the different things here that they're buying and selling. Okay, it takes a lot of time to show that basically the basis of all the things that are going on here is merchants. There's buying and selling going on. That's a big part of all this end times thing. Okay, basically any government stands on three legs. It stands on leadership or the government. It stands on religion, some type of belief. The people have to have a belief that they can share or they just won't come together. And the third one is economy. Many world leaders now say you can have whatever government you want in place, just let me handle the economy. Because he knows that in time he'll run the thing. And that's why the merchants are so involved in this.
When he mentions the souls of men now, he speaks of slaves and then the souls of men.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm.
That some of the, I won't say the greatest, that's the wrong word, I say some of the largest religious organizations in the world, they deal in the souls of men.
Okay.
You've got to do what we say or else. And that makes them slaves and they're dealing in the souls of men.
Okay, yeah, let's go down to the end of verse 13, what he's talking about. There's all these different items we're selling here. It says, and then it goes up to saying, beasts, sheep, horses. Now we're getting up to animals, chariots, and slaves. Now we're buying and selling men, and souls of men. How do you buy or sell the soul of a man? Well, we use a phrase that's similar to that. What does it say that people do that worship Satan or something? There's a phrase you use. You sold your what? Sold your soul to the devil, right? That's the same thing here. Now let's go back to chapter 13. In chapter 13, a special economic program is put into place. What do you have to do to buy or sell?
And the mark of the beast.
Have the mark put on your hand, on your right hand, or on your forehead, right? And it's just not just to show that you won't go to the store. It's to show that you worship the beast. And it says that when you take that mark, you're condemned. So it's not just an economic decision. This is something that you do to show you reject Christ and you follow the Antichrist in his system. That's pretty serious. So that's how they're buying and selling the souls of men, Charlie. We've already seen the details of all that. In fact, 1 Timothy 6, 7 through 10 gives us the center of this whole problem we're facing. Who has that?
But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it's certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men into destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some have coveted after, they have erred from the faith and thrust themselves through with many sorrows.
Okay, so basically it says the same thing Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. When you have food and raiment, therewith be content. If you want more than that...
You know anybody that's in that state now?
Okay.
You know anybody that's really content with their
Very
own
good,
life?
Charlie. It says, in fact, in that same set of scriptures in the Sermon on the Mount, it says if you're wealthy if you have 2 coats. Anybody in here have more than 1 coat or jacket? Guess what? By God's definition, guess what? We're rich. And really, if you look at the news and look at all the times in history, we're better off than any people ever have been before. But yes, Charlie, we need to be content with what we've got and go on for God. And seek ye first what? Seek ye first what? The kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of God and his righteousness. And you'll be given all these other things. And I can promise you that's the truth. Need to move along here. Verse 14. And the fruits that thy soul lusteth after are departed from thee. All things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee. Thou shalt find them no more. The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. Somebody real quick read for me Revelation 17:4.
And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication.
Notice what he just read and what we just read are almost identical, isn't it? The way she was clothed. So this is once again talking about that city and that religious system being linked. They're together. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. Every shipmaster and all the companies in ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off. Now we've talked about the kings, we've talked about the merchants, now we talk about the shipmasters. And cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is likened to this great city? They cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea, by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. Shipmasters now are standing there weeping and wailing. They've had a good business too, transporting stuff. In fact, it's come out, one of the interesting things about the business world that's come out in this century has been the fact that you don't get rich anymore necessarily making things. It used to be 50 years ago, if you wanted to really do well, you made things. But in this last 10 or 20 years, things have suddenly changed. And the people that are really getting rich, who's the richest man in America just a few years ago, still is today, I think he's dead now, but his family is part of an empire. They've got a store right down here in town. Who said Walmart? Sam Walton. Sam Walton never made a thing in his life. He never created or invented anything. You know what he learned to do? How to take stuff and move it out to where the people are and sell it. He moved things. Distribution is what it's called. That's the big way people are getting rich today. Walmart, Kmart, we've got Target, all these stores. It's not like it was 30 years ago, is it, Francis? Little mom and pop stores in town. Do you know that in Vermont, Walmart is illegal? Kmart is illegal? For the very reason we were just talking about. Because they feel it gives an unfair advantage for a big corporation to come out, and it always wipes out the little shops. Look at Lebanon 20 years ago. And all the little shops around. Now go down the street and look at all them little empty buildings. Okay? Walmart come in and he made a great deal for the consumers. And he has created a lot of jobs. But his distribution system has just made things so much cheaper and easier for us. See? And that's why the shipmasters are so tore up. See, they're the distributors of their day. They're the ones moving all these products around.
They are just a great monopoly is what they are. They know what they control the prices to a great deal.
Oh, yeah.
They Kmart. Oh, you know, there's others, but I mean, that's true. We know about them.
And Walmart's a wonderful system. I mean, I think it's great that I can go down to Walmart and buy stuff now that I couldn't, a lot cheaper than I could 10 years ago. And a lot better stuff. Yeah, it's been great for the people. But remember, is money the root of all evil?
All the love.
The love of money, right. Sam Walton seemed to be a very religious man, by the way. He seemed to be a wonderful man to come up with a wonderful system. But I'm letting you see here a parallel between what he did and what they're doing. They're the shipmasters. They're distributing the goods, and they're getting rich too in this system.
It seems to me that Mr. Walton was not money crazy himself, but because he as his wealth expanded, he helped.
Yes, sir. That's exactly right.
All over everywhere that he covered.
Came up with a wonderful system.
To say that he drove an old beat-up truck all the last years of his life, he could have had anything where he wanted. That's what he used, pickup truck.
You want to read a heartwarming story, you read. He's got a biography that's out now. It's a wonderful story. One of those rags to riches stories. He just started out, worked hard, and he made it work. He's the epitome of the American dream. Okay? But that's part of all this picture we're seeing here. Verse 20. Now, we've seen up to this point how the world is reacting to Mystery Babylon and this city burning. How the kings reacted, how the merchants reacted, and how the shipmasters reacted. Now, let's see heaven's response to all this stuff. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. Remember the scene we saw back in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, where we saw, it was chapter 6. In Revelation chapter 6, we see the picture of all the saints around the throne. Are they rejoicing in that picture? What are they saying? Do you remember? They're standing around the throne saying, how long, Lord, before you avenge us? Okay? Here's the answer to that question finally. You've now been avenged. And mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. I think this picture is very important. An angel throwing a millstone into the sea. There's another verse about that in Matthew 18, verse 6. Who has that? Okay. If you offend one of God's little ones, whether it's one of them little ones there or one of his followers, it's better that what happened, a millstone be hung around your neck and you be drowned in the sea. You see the same picture here. The whole system gets that same judgment. And the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and of trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee. No craftsman or whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of the millstone shall be heard no more in thee. And the light of the candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries, remember I mentioned to you about one of those doctrines? Sorcery. Were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and the saints and all that were slain upon the earth. This is a final judgment upon that city. Basically because of what all they've done. Now once again, notice, not only is she destroyed, but nobody goes back in there again. Nobody's going to go back there and rebuild again. Okay, now that's God's judgment, but once again, let's go back to what we were talking about. What happens to a city that's destroyed in a nuclear holocaust? You can't go back in there no more. Sometimes for many years, sometimes it says for hundreds of years you'll not be able to go back in there. And it says here that no more will people go in there. Basically, this is the final judgment of Mystery Babylon. Now, when God created the earth, he set up an order, a world order. Satan came along and didn't like it, so he set up a new world order. We hear that phrase today a lot, don't we? A new world order. See, God sets it up and then everybody wants to change it. Since that time, all men have come down through the world and went one way or the other. They followed God's order or their own order, or the new world order. And that's the way it's always been. So today you need to think about this, okay? Which way are you headed? Whose order are you following? Are you following orders coming from God? Are you following Jesus and his order? Or are you following another order? Think on that. Are there any questions? Thank you for your time.
What do you think is